That ghetto girl's grandstanding. That's what one congressman hissed, hot mic on, as Jasmine Crockett stood in silence beneath the glare of 1,000 cameras. But 47 seconds later, the ghetto girl dropped a red wristband on the table and made Donald Trump's empire flinch on live television. $13,000 could have saved a dying 9-year-old. But that same night, $2.7 million left the Eric Trump Foundation, headed straight into a political machine bearing the Trump name. This isn't just about fraud. It's about how a billionaire family cashed in on a child's death until one woman dared to drag the receipt into Congress. The camera flickers to life in black and white. A hospital room, still and sterile. The only motion is the soft, fading pulse line of a monitor. No nurses, no doctors. Just a boy. Still breathing, but barely. His name is Davian Marsh, 9 years old. Diagnosed with leukemia. Too quiet, too poor, too invisible. Overhead, a single fluorescent light trembles, buzzing weakly like it's afraid of the silence. And then, without warning, the heart monitor sighs once and stops. No alarms, no rush of footsteps. Just stillness. Earlier that same day, a woman sat across from a foundation board. Their suits were crisp. Their smiles were polite. The topic? Budget cuts for non-PR beneficial cases. One voice, a communications executive, delivered the line like he'd said it 100 times. Let's pull funding from kids that don't move the needle. No camera potential, no coverage. No one argued. 4 hours later, a server logged an internal decision. Case rejected. No PR value. The recipient? Deborah Marsh, Davian's mother. She didn't cry. She begged. She refreshed the foundation portal over and over, hoping the status would change from pending to approved. And when it finally updated, it said just one word: denied. She ran, pleaded. A security guard told her to sit down. By the time she reached her son's door, he was already gone. No doctor came to explain. No call from the foundation. Only a plastic Ziploc bag marked personal effects. Inside, one Lego figurine and a red rubber wristband stamped in foil. Thank you for believing in me, Trump Children's Fund. Deborah didn't scream. She just held the wristband to her chest like maybe it could still carry a pulse. And under her breath, she said, he believed in you, and you let him die. America hadn't heard his name yet, but in 11 days, that same wristband would sit on a congressional table and make the Trump family wish they'd never touched it. The morning after Davian died, the sun rose like it always does, indifferent. The hospital air still smelled of bleach and leftover cafeteria coffee. Deborah Marsh sat in the hallway outside room 712, her hands numb, her body quiet in that way grief makes you weightless. At 8:13 a.m., her phone buzzed. It was an email. Subject line, thank you for trusting the Trump Children's Fund. No condolences, no call, just a form letter and a link. We value your feedback. Please take a moment to complete our donor satisfaction survey. She stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. Then she laughed just once, a dry, stunned laugh like someone choking on dust. Her child had died hours earlier, rejected by a foundation named after a billionaire's son, and now they wanted her opinion on service quality? She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She closed the email and stood up, slowly, like she was carrying another person's body on her spine. In the waiting room, a nurse handed her a bag marked Patient Belongings. Inside, Davian's socks, a worn Lego minifigure, a half-used stick of cherry lip balm, and a small red rubber wristband. Deborah didn't recognize it at first, but then she turned it over. Thank you for believing in me. Trump Children's Fund. Gold foil lettering, perfectly pressed. Lee. Still warm from his skin, she sank into the nearest chair and held the band like it was his hand. She brought it to her cheek, then to her lips, as if somehow the heat could be transferred back, as if this single loop of rubber might carry his pulse home. She didn't cry. She slid the wristband onto her own wrist and whispered, you believed in them, but they never believed in you. That was the moment something shifted, not just in her grief, but in her spine, in her will. Her mourning coiled inward, sharpening. That same afternoon, funeral planning began, But the charity still hadn't called. The hospital refused to waive fees. She had to crowdfund a coffin. She posted Davian's photo online. Not the sick one, not the IV tubes or sunken eyes. The one where he's holding a plastic stethoscope, grinning wide, cheeks full of light. The one where he told her, "When I get better, I'm going to fix kids like me." Only a few people shared it. No news outlets picked it up. No headlines. Just another sad black child in an overrun hospital. But Deborah remembered something an administrator once said under her breath when she was asking for paperwork. Unless he's on a billboard, he's not priority. And so she made him one. At the funeral, she wore a plain black dress and the red wristband over her wrist like armor. The service was small. The pastor mispronounced his name twice. A man from the funeral home apologized for the basic urn. Her relatives wept. Deborah didn't. When it was her turn to speak, she walked up to the pulpit and looked straight into the faces of the 10 people who showed up. Then she raised her arm, showing the red wristband like it was a flag pulled from a battlefield. "My son didn't die of cancer," she said. "He died of paperwork, of rejection, of silence." No one moved. She continued. "He asked me once, when he was still strong, why do kids have to be lucky to live? And I didn't know what to say. So I told him, sometimes we have to make noise so they remember us." She stepped back from the podium, sat down, and never looked at the wristband the same way again. That night, in the kitchen of her one-bedroom apartment, surrounded by collection notices and uneaten casseroles, Deborah picked up her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call the press. She emailed one woman she'd seen once on CS-PAN, back when Davian was asleep on the couch and she was folding laundry. To Jasmine Crockett, U.S. Congresswoman. Subject: you should see where the money really went. No punctuation, no greeting, just 5 words. Attached were 2 files, a PDF copy of the denial letter and a photograph of Davian's obituary, lying beneath the same red wristband. No one covered his death, but someone would cover the fallout. What she didn't know then was that Jasmine wouldn't sleep that night, that she would forward the files to her legal team before sunrise, that she would call in a favor from a retired federal auditor with a shaky past and a bulletproof conscience. What Deborah also didn't know was that in less than 2 weeks, that same red rubber wristband would become more than grief. It would become evidence. And once it landed on a table in Congress, nothing would ever be the same again. Jasmine Crockett was used to the inbox chaos. Thousands of unread messages, press requests, hate mail laced with racial slurs, and the occasional note of gratitude from someone who still believed change was possible. But the message that changed everything didn't come with a subject line. It didn't have a sender she recognized. It didn't even have a greeting. It arrived at 1:07 a.m., flagged undeliverable 3 times before slipping past filters. No introduction, no signature. Just a line of text that hit her harder than any insult ever could. This band didn't fade. It was erased. There were 2 attachments. She didn't open them right away. Something about the tone, quiet, almost reverent, made her hesitate. She stared at the screen for several seconds, her finger hovering over the touchpad. She'd been in politics long enough to know that the loudest files rarely mattered. But the quiet ones, the ones dropped like whispers in the dark, they could set entire administrations on fire. She clicked. The first file was a PDF, clean, official. It bore the heading, Eric Trump Foundation, Transfer Authorization. Below that, a date, November 14th. Jasmine's heart ticked once, hard. That was the same day Deborah Marsh was told there was no money left for her son. Further down, a figure, $2,700,000 recipient, Victory 24. Patsy Purpose, Outreach, Emergency Allocation. She scanned for the signature. There it was, Eric Frederick Trump, signed in deep black ink. Her breath slowed. This wasn't a breadcrumb. It was a body. She opened the second file. It was a photo. Grainy, poorly lit, but unmistakable. A small white coffin. On top of it, a red rubber wristband, folded neatly beside a laminated obituary. The foil lettering caught just enough light to be legible. "Thank you for believing in me. Trump Children's Fund." Jasmine dropped her hand from the mouse. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Then she whispered aloud, Jesus Christ. Not because of the money, not because of the signature, but because of what wasn't in either file. No emotion, no acknowledgement, no hint that anyone in that boardroom, in that foundation, had even paused to consider the child whose name had been deleted with one email. A second monitor lit up. Her legal server had auto-synced. She pulled the photo into a secure folder and locked it behind encryption. Then she opened her notebook and scribbled one word: erased. Not denied, not overlooked. Erased. She picked up her phone and texted her chief of staff, even though it was well past midnight. Clear my calendar tomorrow, morning through evening. I need a full privacy lock, no press. Just the team. Bring the legal aid and call Glenn. Glenn. Arthur Glenn. A name she hadn't said out loud in nearly a year. He was a former federal auditor, a whistleblower who once uncovered misuse of veterans' healthcare funds. After exposing a multi-million-dollar scheme, he vanished, changed his name, started growing tomatoes on a plot of land in Virginia. Jasmine had called in a favor once, long ago, and he'd answered. She had a feeling he would again. Within 20 minutes, she had him on an encrypted line. You saw the transfer, didn't you? His voice was scratchy, like static wrapped in gravel. She didn't answer at first. It just landed, she said finally. How long have you known? Too long, Glenn replied. But I couldn't move on it, not without a link to a casualty. And now you have one. You're telling me this wasn't isolated? He chuckled once, bitter. Isolated? Jasmine, this was intentional. They've been moving money through kids' hospitals for years. Nobody looks. Nobody questions charity. That red wristband? He paused. It's not a promise. It's a disguise. She sat still, phone pressed to her ear like it was bleeding. Glenn kept talking. He laid out the mechanics. How small shell nonprofits, registered under different names in Delaware, would open for 90 days, pull donations, then quietly dissolve. How medical outreach funds were rerouted through awareness campaigns that never launched. How PACs like Victory 24 received money in windows so short the IRS didn't catch the trail. That $2.7 million, he said. It never went near a child. Jasmine didn't respond. She was staring again at the photo, the wristband, the little boy's name in faded ink beneath the words, "Thank you for believing in me." Her eyes stung. But she didn't cry. She just whispered, "Then I'll bring this straight to the floor." Glenn's voice dropped low. "You do that, Jasmine, and you'd better not blink." By 3:14 a.m., she drafted an internal memo to the Oversight Committee. By 4 she had 3 staffers on NDA-bound assignments. By 5 a private courier had been dispatched to retrieve physical records. She didn't sleep. The red wristband photo sat pinned in the corner of her monitor like a ghost she wasn't ready to let go of. Like a child who needed to be heard just once before the noise buried him again. And when dawn finally broke over the Capitol dome, Jasmine Crockett zipped up her blazer, slipped a flash drive into her jacket pocket, and walked out the door. Because now it wasn't just about Davian. It was about every child erased in silence, and every billionaire who thought no one would notice. Jasmine Crockett knew better than most that truth rarely came through official channels. The real truth, the kind with blood on it, always came whispered, encrypted, or scared. And Arthur Glenn had been all three. He hadn't used his real name in 2 years, not since walking away from a 30-year career as a federal forensic auditor with the Treasury Department. Not since refusing to testify before a congressional subcommittee investigating nonprofit fraud tied to political campaigns. Not since someone had tried to run his car off a West Virginia back road 2 nights before he was scheduled to speak under oath. Now he lived off the grid, in a place where cell towers didn't reach and mailboxes had no names. Jasmine reached him through a burner relay line that her legal aid kept in a locked drawer, marked only Redline Contact G. It took 4 rings. "You've seen the files, haven't you?" His voice rasped like old wires snapping in the wind. "I have," Jasmine said, "and I know what they are, but I don't know how far it goes." He didn't pause. Far enough to collapse a foundation. Maybe more. Maybe a campaign. Depends how loud you're willing to get. "Loud enough," she said quietly. "If you give me what I need." "Then listen." What came next didn't sound like theory. It sounded like confession. Arthur had been tracking the Trump Children's Fund for 4 years, ever since they began quietly rerouting hospital donations through emergency awareness programs. These programs didn't exist beyond a few photos on event pages. No staff, no office, no patients. Just dummy websites and EIN numbers, registered in states like Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada, where regulation was as thin as paper and oversight even thinner. What first caught his attention wasn't the wire transfers themselves, but the timing. Payments that exited charitable accounts within hours of high-profile medical rejections. Children denied care on the very day the foundation drained millions into PACs. It was a formula, Arthur said. Deny the kid, send the money, erase the evidence, repeat. But the red wristbands? That was new. Or rather, it had always been there. He just hadn't seen them for what they really were. I thought they were just optics. You know, branding, a prop. But I was wrong. They were the key. He told Jasmine how a cluster of denied cases had popped up on his radar months earlier. 9 in total, all in pediatric care, all tied to requests sent through the same charity portal. All denied, all dead within weeks. He'd cross-referenced foundation records, and every one of those children had been sent a wristband before the denial came in. You send a wristband to a family, it looks like love. It feels like hope. But legally, he paused. It's a line item. It means the case is closed. They call it a soft gratitude artifact, a token sent once support is rescinded. Jasmine felt her stomach shift. What kind of people send a child a thank you gift as they pull the plug on his care? I have their names, Arthur said. The 9. I logged them before I vanished. You want them? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He knew. A few minutes later, an encrypted file landed in her private server. 9 names. 9 rejections. 9 wristbands. 9 obituaries. And in the final column of Arthur's spreadsheet, denial reason. Not aligned with strategic visibility metrics. Jasmine's fingers curled slowly into a fist. Why now, she asked. Why give this to me? Because you're the only one who still reads the whole file. And because Davian Marsh wasn't just a victim, he was the first one with a witness. The line went quiet. Then Glenn added, barely above a whisper, but I need you to understand something, Jasmine. This isn't just about Eric, or the wristbands. This thing runs deeper than a campaign stunt. There's foreign money in some of those wires. You take this public, they will come for you. She didn't flinch. Then let them. She thanked him and ended the call, hands trembling, but not from fear, from clarity. It wasn't just fraud anymore. It was a machine, cold, calculating, polished in red rubber and stamped with gratitude. Jasmine closed the file and stared out the window of her office. The Capitol dome stood lit against the night like a theater set, hollow, elegant, fragile. She looked down at the post-it on her desk, where she had written that single word hours earlier. Erased. Now she added 2 more beneath it, 9 more. She sat there for a long time, her breathing slow, steady, controlled. And when she finally rose from her chair, she didn't take a speech with her, she didn't call press, she didn't post a tweet. She picked up the flash drive, grabbed the red wristband, and walked toward the Oversight Committee office. Because erasure ends the moment someone decides to remember out loud. Jasmine Crockett didn't wait for permission. She didn't schedule a press briefing or poll donors or weigh the optics. She just walked straight into the Oversight Committee's chair office with a manila folder in one hand and fire in her eyes. Representative Gail Simmons was already pouring coffee. Jasmine placed the folder on her desk without a word. Inside, a flash drive, a transcript, and a photo of a child's casket, his red wristband glinting under weak church light. Gail opened the file slowly, like it might burn her fingers. She read in silence for nearly 2 minutes, then looked up, eyes hard. You understand what this means? I do, Jasmine said. You're not just accusing a man. I know. You're accusing a dynasty. Then I'll need a microphone. The room fell into a quiet that felt like pre-surgery stillness. No speeches, no shouting. Just the electric hum of a woman who had stopped asking nicely. By noon, an emergency vote was called. The Oversight Committee had subpoena power. Jasmine had the receipts. And for the first time in a decade, Congress agreed on one thing. This wasn't going away. They voted to open a live public hearing. Date, March 22nd. Location, hearing room 236. Subpoenas, Donald Trump. Eric Trump. Victory 24. Pass. Trump Children's Fund. Jasmine didn't flinch. She signed her name in black ink and walked out of the room. Within hours, Washington ignited. One staffer whispered, "She just nuked her career." Another said, "She won't survive this." But Jasmine had buried enough constituents to know what real risk looked like. Losing a seat? That wasn't risk. Losing a child to paperwork? That was. By evening, Fox News broke the story. Crockett targets Trump family in exploitative charity hoax. Eric Trump was on air within minutes. He looked smug, collected, but his tie was crooked, his tone a bit too defensive. "This is nothing but a hoax," he said, eyes glinting beneath studio lights. "A political stunt from a woman desperate for attention. We helped thousands of families. You think one tragedy negates that? Please." He laughed. The host laughed. But the clip didn't go viral because of the laughter. It went viral because of what happened next. The host leaned in. "Are you saying the child in question didn't exist?" Eric hesitated. Too long. Then said, "Look, I don't have every case file in front of me." Millions watched that pause like it was an admission. On Twitter, yours, Davian Marsh, began to trend. So did Mueller red band receipts. CNN picked it up, then MSNBC, then late-night comedy shows. Within 36 hours, it had passed 42 million impressions. But Jasmine stayed quiet. She wasn't playing for headlines. She was preparing for war. Her team expanded their legal brief overnight. Glenn sent another file, this one containing cross-links between Eric's PAC and 3 offshore accounts, all routed through short-lived medical charities. She presented the findings to Gail at dawn. Gail stared at the screen. "You're saying some of this money might be foreign?" "Russian, Cyprus shell, routed through a wellness nonprofit in Tampa." "Jesus." "Yeah." Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She went back to her office and stood by the window and watched the Capitol lights flicker in the early morning fog. Then she slipped the red wristband onto her wrist. For the first time since the story broke, her hands shook, not from fear, from focus. Because this wasn't about partisanship anymore. It wasn't even about Trump. It was about Davian Marsh and the 9 other names Glenn had given her. It was about every child whose death had been measured not by need, but by camera appeal. That afternoon, Capitol Hill braced for impact. Conservative outlets called her a race-baiting witch. One op-ed accused her of weaponizing tragedy for clout. But across the country, the sentiment was shifting. A nurse from St. Lillian's posted anonymously, "We tried to keep him alive. We begged the billing office to override the denial. They said it was out of their hands." A mother in Detroit posted a picture of her son, also denied funding in 2022. He too had worn a red wristband. A teacher from Georgia created a classroom bulletin board titled "Kids They Didn't See" and printed Davian's picture next to it. The silence was cracking. And inside room 236, the chairs were being arranged. The microphones tested, the witness list finalized. Donald Trump hadn't spoken publicly yet. His team released a single cold statement. President Trump supports charitable work for children. He has no involvement in this alleged matter and considers the accusations a partisan smear. But he was coming. Subpoenaed, mandated, unavoidable, and Jasmine Crockett was waiting. She didn't need noise, she had facts. She had names. And she had one red wristband that had already outlived every denial. What was coming wasn't just a hearing, it was a reckoning. The temperature inside room 236 didn't come from the thermostat. It came from eyes, hundreds of them. Press lined the back wall, pens already twitching. Staffers clutched clipboards like shields. Network cameras blinked red, broadcasting the feed live to 38 million Americans. Some watched from break rooms, others from hospital lobbies, a few from kitchens still bearing photos of children lost without explanation. Then Jasmine Crockett walked in. She didn't come flanked by aides or cameras. She came alone, deliberate, with the kind of calm that didn't need rehearsal. In her left hand, she carried a simple manila folder. In her right, the red wristband. She didn't look at the crowd. Not yet. She looked only at the table where two men were already seated. Eric Trump, stiff in a navy suit, lips pressed into a fake calm. And beside him, Donald Trump, expression unreadable, still as granite. Jasmine sat down, unfolded the file, and placed the wristband, Davian's wristband, on the center of the table like a relic. It made no sound, but the room shifted. She adjusted her mic, took one breath, then began. On November 14th, 2024, a child named Davian Marsh died in room 712 of St. Lillian's Pediatric Center. He was 9 years old. He had leukemia. His mother had applied 3 times for charitable aid from the Trump Children's Fund. She held up a printout. This, she tapped the screen above her, which now displayed a rejection email, is what she received. Time-stamped 7:36 p.m., rejected due to limited media viability. She turned the page. 16 minutes earlier, at 7:20 p.m., a wire transfer was initiated. Another screen lit up. $2.7 million from the Eric Trump Foundation to a pass named Victory 24. Signed, she glanced directly at Eric, by Mr. Eric Trump. Eric shifted. His fingers twitched. A bead of sweat began to form along his hairline. Jasmine didn't stop. The same day, a child was deemed too invisible to save. A multi-million-dollar transfer was approved to fund political optics. She paused, allowing the silence to breathe. No one moved. Even the Republican panel members, usually itching to interrupt, remained still. She slid another page forward. 9 other children were rejected that month. All wore this same wristband. All were denied care. All died. Eric leaned toward his lawyer, whispering urgently. Jasmine raised the wristband. This wasn't charity. It was a receipt, a signal to the billing department that the child would receive nothing but this rubber lie. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The camera cut to Donald Trump. His arms were folded, but his jaw clenched, a muscle twitching along his cheek. Jasmine leaned closer to the mic. And this? She gestured to the wire transfer. This is how a campaign launders public goodwill through the silence of dying children. Gasps rippled through the gallery. One reporter scribbled the phrase, launders goodwill, in bold letters. Another just stopped writing altogether, frozen. Then she turned to the panel. Some of you may call this politics, but tell me, if it were your son lying in that hospital bed, would you call this political theater? She let the question hang. No one answered. Even the most seasoned members of the committee stared down at their notes, like they didn't want to meet the moment head-on. Jasmine wasn't done. She tapped again. A new image appeared. The funeral photo, Davian's casket, the red wristband resting on top. This is where your signature landed, Mr. Trump, she said, eyes locked on Eric. Not in a hospital, not in treatment, but on top of a coffin too small to carry the weight of your indifference. Eric opened his mouth, then closed it again. Donald Trump finally leaned forward. This is a smear job, he barked. A disgrace to this institution. You're weaponizing a child's death for clout. Jasmine didn't flinch. No, Mr. Trump, I'm weaponizing the truth. She slid one final document across the table. A list of the 9 other names, 9 wristbands, 9 denials, 9 funerals. Every wristband was sent out after the decision to cut aid had already been made, and every single one of those children died believing help was coming. The room went still. On every screen across the country, the image of that red band burned in. It wasn't a symbol anymore. It was an indictment. And Jasmine Crockett, without raising her voice, had just made America listen. Not with rage, but with receipts, with evidence, and with one small wristband that spoke louder than any campaign ever could. The reckoning had begun. Eric Trump had been fidgeting for 12 minutes straight, first with his pen, then with the crystal water glass, and now with the collar of his $1,000 suit. Each time Jasmine Crockett introduced a new piece of evidence, his knee bounced a little faster. When she slid forward a sealed document bearing the Justice Department watermark, his tapping stopped, replaced by the slow curl of his lip. She read calmly, firmly, without theatrics. Page 6. Transfer of $2.7 million routed from the Eric Trump Foundation to a PAC fronting as a children's aid initiative, dated 1 hour before the denial of care to Davian Marsh. Her voice didn't rise, but every word landed like a hammer. Page 9, internal memo. Use tragedy to pivot optics. Rebrand failure as philanthropic delay. Eric's hands curled into fists. "You're making this up," he muttered. But the mic caught it. Jasmine didn't even look at him. She placed a single image on the table. A color printout of the red wristband. Davian's name, half faded on the band. Item recovered from the morgue at Ward 4C. Held until the nurse retired. She mailed it to me with one sentence. "He died clutching this." The chamber didn't move. Then Eric snapped. "You think you're better than us?" His voice cracked as it broke past his own restraint. "You think this makes you some kind of saint?" Jasmine didn't reply. Instead, she tapped her tablet once. The screen behind her came alive. A blown-up email thread from inside the Trump Foundation. Subject line, "Low-impact pediatric appeals." Midway through the text, in bold letters, one line stood out. "Sick kids don't vote, so fade them quietly." Gas echoed through the hearing room. Audible, human, raw. A Republican aide in the back covered her mouth. Another staffer turned pale. Jasmine didn't blink. That line was written by the Foundation's external communications director. It was CC'd to 3 board members, including Mr. Trump. She turned slightly, gaze steady as steel. "You didn't just walk away from these children. You instructed others to let them vanish." Eric looked to his legal counsel, face flushing red. His father sat frozen, stiffer than marble. But behind the cameras, America was moving. Within minutes, screenshots of the email hit social media. The phrase, "fade them quietly," spread like fire. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Comment sections erupted. Photos of children with wristbands surfaced. Grieving parents started sharing stories. Rejected calls, unanswered emails, form letter condolences. Within hours, word on "fade them quietly" had overtaken every trending topic in the country. It was no longer a hearing, it was an awakening. And Jasmine hadn't raised her voice once. Eric tried to recover. That line was taken out of context. Jasmine calmly rotated the screen to show the entire email chain. Not a single edit, not a cut. Just silence from the people who were supposed to be listening. "You funded red carpets. You rented actors to pose as patients. You spent more on champagne than chemotherapy. And when the kids didn't photograph well enough, you faded them." She let the final word linger. Faded. She tapped again. Up came the gala budget. Line items, receipts. One caught everyone's attention. Staging and lighting, $128,000. Pediatric assistance, $0. A hush fell like snow. Jasmine's voice dropped, soft but cutting. "You turned children into hashtags, and when they died, you turned off the cameras." Eric stood again. "You're twisting everything. This is political theater." Jasmine finally met his eyes. "No, Mr. Trump, this is what happens when politics kills children." It hit the room like a bell toll. Even the stenographer paused, her hands hovering above the keys, as if the weight of the moment demanded silence before it could be recorded. Outside the chamber, networks cut into live broadcasts. Fox scrambled to reframe the story. MSNBC reran the wristband footage on a loop. CNN aired a side-by-side of Davian's face and the wire transfer signature. At that exact moment, a mother in Ohio posted a photo of her daughter, age 6, terminal cancer, rejected for care in 2023. She wore the same red wristband. The caption read, "They faded her too." And in Congress, Jasmine sat still. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't wept. She had just told the truth. And the empire across the table was cracking. Because when the powerful are faced with evidence they can't deny, their last defense is rage. And Jasmine Crockett had just stripped them of even that. The mic was still on. The band still visible. And America, for the first time in far too long, was listening. Jasmine Crockett had just delivered silence as a weapon. But what came next wasn't silence. It was precision. Cold, clinical, and far more dangerous. A side door opened near the witness bench. A woman walked in slowly, heels soft against the marble. She wasn't escorted by security. She didn't need fanfare. She carried only a slim briefcase and wore the expression of someone who had nothing left to lose. Her name appeared on the screen behind her. Judy Blanchard, former senior budget accountant, Trump Children's Fund few, in the chamber recognized her name. But those who worked in finance, who understood the weight of access, they sat forward. Judy sat without looking at the cameras. She adjusted her glasses, opened her folder, and began reading from a single page in her lap. Her voice was even, dry, devoid of emotion. I was responsible for reviewing expense reports and contract disbursements tied to donor events, including the March 2023 Hearts for Hope Gala hosted by the Trump Children's Fund at the Marigold Grand Hotel. She cleared her throat, eyes never leaving the paper. 6 weeks prior to the event, I was handed a list labeled Optics Forward Talent Inventory. It included 12 children's names, followed by notations marked viable for stage presence. The room didn't move. 2 days later, I received a revised list, not of patients, but of paid talent, from an agency in Queens. Actors, children, under contract. Gasps began to ripple, but Judy wasn't finished. She slid a printed contract onto the table and tilted the mic toward it. The screen behind her lit up with one line in bold, typed in 12-point Arial. Crutches provided. Talent must sign NDA. Murmurs turned into chaos. Reporters leaned forward. A senator whispered to an aide, "Is this real?" Judy continued. The children seen on stage at the gala, the ones presented with oversized donation checks and red wristbands, were not patients. They were models hired to portray terminal illness. One was a boy named Tyler Evans. I met him. He had just auditioned for a yogurt commercial the day before. She paused, blinked. For the first time, her voice trembled. I didn't say anything then. I thought, well, if the money helps real kids later, maybe it's justified. She looked up at Jasmine, then past her to the committee. But then the budgets came in, and I realized no money ever went to the hospitals. Not a single dime from that gala. She tapped another page. Lighting and staging, $124,700 floral arrangements, $38,900 champagne, $16,200 pediatric care, zero. Someone in the gallery gasped out loud. Judy sat straighter. The trembling was gone. What you saw on stage, the tears, the hugs, the dramatic wristband presentations, it was theater, and I helped build the set. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. She let Judy's voice hang in the air, sharper than any accusation. But then came the moment no one expected. Judy reached into her folder and pulled out a second document. 3 days before I resigned, I received a folder marked RCO, Marsh File. It included a disbursement directive signed by Eric Trump, $2.7 million, memo line PR burned through Q4. The screen updated. The committee stared at it in stunned silence. When I asked why it referenced the name Marsh, I was told, and I quote, "It's charity if it looks like charity." Eric exploded. She's lying. She was dismissed years ago. We have no record of her seeing that file. But he didn't sound confident. He sounded scared. Judy reached calmly into her case and produced a USB stick. Here's the access log from the internal server. Time-stamped. Downloaded by me. Forwarded to legal counsel. Unopened until now. Jasmine glanced at the committee chair. Madam Chair, she said evenly, I request this be entered into evidence. So granted. Eric sank back in his seat. His father didn't speak. Not a word. His arms folded tightly, but his eyes no longer burned with rage. They were calculating, like a man who knows the walls are closing in. Outside the chamber, the reaction was instantaneous. Fake sick kids began trending within 11 minutes. News anchors choked on their own scripts. Donors started pulling pledges from the foundation in real time. Inside, Judy packed her folder with calm hands. She looked once more at the wristband on the table. I stayed quiet too long, she said, because I thought no one would listen. But it turns out, the country was waiting for someone to speak first. And just like that, she stood and walked away. A woman who had once helped stage the lie, now handing the nation its sharpest piece of truth. The soundbite spread like wildfire. Crutches provided. Talent must sign NDA. The moment it hit cable news, the country cracked in two. Within hours, Judy Blanchard's testimony was spliced into TikTok clips, quoted in editorials, looped in newsrooms. The red wristband became more than a symbol. It became a fracture line. Jasmine Crockett's inbox exploded. Some messages read like prayers, others like death threats. Subject line, "You don't speak for me." Subject line, "Bless you for speaking for my son." Subject line, "One bullet, that's all it takes." The Capitol Police doubled her security detail by nightfall. Her staff begged her to stay off live TV. She didn't listen, not because she was reckless, but because the silence felt worse. Meanwhile, across the country, Deborah Marsh sat down in a small studio chair at CNN. No lights, no glam, no script. Just her, a photo of Davian, and a voice still raw from years of being ignored. When the host asked, "What do you want America to understand?" she didn't blink. "That my son died for their optics." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. But the words landed like a slow-breaking wave, swallowing air, logic, and every excuse ever made in a donor meeting. "They sent us a wristband instead of medicine. They used my baby's death to make themselves look generous. And then they called it charity." Her voice cracked, just once, but she kept going. "I buried a child while they popped champagne." The interview lasted 8 minutes, but it played for days. Clips were stitched into protest reels, music videos, even children's choirs. Schools held assemblies. Nurses started writing in. One posted anonymously from Missouri, "We were told to prioritize media-viable cases too. I thought it was just budgeting. Now I feel sick." In Baton Rouge, a 12-year-old girl named Aaliyah J. wrote a letter to Jasmine Crockett. It was folded into an envelope decorated with crayon stars. No return address, just 3 words on the back. "Please open this." Inside, "Dear Miss Jasmine, I watched the hearing with my grandma. She said you were brave. I didn't know what laundering meant, but I understood when you said he died holding that band. It made me cry. Not because I was scared, because it made me feel like I could speak too. Because of you, I want to be loud. Love, Aaliyah, age 12." Jasmine read the letter in her office at 3:11 a.m., unable to sleep. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled slightly as she placed it beside the wristband, as if those 2 artifacts, one made of rubber, one made of hope, somehow knew each other. The next day, things got louder. Tucker Carlson released a segment titled "The Red Wristband Lie," claiming the entire hearing was manufactured by liberal operatives. On Facebook, conspiracy pages erupted with doctored images of Davian smiling beside actors from other events, accusing Jasmine of using a fake child for real votes. Hashtags like Carson Wristband Gate and "Dust for Actress Accountant" started trending on the far right. Threats multiplied. Fox News aired a special, "Is Jasmine Crockett America's newest hoax?" But for every smear there was a reply. Doctors, teachers, pediatric nurses, mothers who buried children with red wristbands tucked in their coffins. Twitter lit up with a new wave. He was real. Or Davian deserved better. Can my child too? And then the networks turned on each other. CNN aired a full hour titled "The Wristband Scandal, What We Know." MSNBC did a breakdown of the wire transfers, showing how $2.7 million skipped hospitals and landed in Victory 24 within 22 minutes of Davian's denial. Even The View opened with a moment of silence. The women at the table wore red bands over their wrists. But the most shocking moment came from an unexpected source. CBS's 60 Minutes, long considered centrist and cautious, announced a full-scale investigation into the Trump Children's Fund. Their teaser ended with a chilling voiceover. What if the wristband on your child's arm wasn't a symbol of hope, but a signal to stop trying? Back in D.C., Jasmine walked out of a side exit after a closed-door meeting. A reporter lunged forward. "Congresswoman, how do you respond to accusations that you're politicizing grief?" She stopped, turned slowly, looked the camera dead in the eye. Grief was politicized the moment a child's death became a branding tool. She didn't wait for follow-ups. The storm was now beyond anyone's control. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a referendum, not just on charity fraud, but on who gets to live, who gets remembered, and who gets erased. Inside her office that night, Jasmine looked once more at Aaliyah's letter, now pinned beside Davian's photo and Judy Blanchard's subpoena. Below it all, the red wristband lay still on her desk. Silent, simple, but louder than anything cable news could scream. And for the first time in her career, Jasmine Crockett understood. The real battle wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the country's conscience. And that war had just begun. The walls of room 236 had heard lies before. They had echoed with ambition, denial, partisan theater. But this day was different. The air was thick, not just with heat from the cameras, but with something tighter, sharper. Anticipation. Jasmine Crockett sat at the head of the table, the red wristband still visible on her wrist, worn like an oath. Across from her, Eric Trump stared ahead, jaw locked, fingers curled beneath the table where the cameras couldn't see. Donald Trump, arms crossed, leaned back with the bored arrogance of someone who had survived too many hearings to believe in consequences. Jasmine didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached into a folder and pulled out a small, unmarked digital recorder. She placed it gently on the table. No theatrics, just presence. Then she pressed play. "Look, it's not fraud if they believe it's charity." The voice crackled through the speakers. Clear, unmistakable. Eric Trump. There was no confusion, no voice actor, no distortion. You slap a sick kid's face on a flyer, add a donation button, and people throw money at you. It's not stealing, it's branding. The gallery erupted, gasps, shuffling. Reporters leaned forward like sharks scenting blood and water. Flashbulbs flickered, journalists texting so fast their thumbs blurred. Eric's face drained of color. Donald leaned forward, red-faced. "This is a disgrace," he shouted, fists slamming the table. "You're playing dirty. That recording is illegally obtained. This entire hearing is a political ambush." But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice, didn't even look at him. Instead, she reached down and lifted the red wristband into the air. It looked small in her fingers, soft, fragile, but it landed heavier than any gavel. "This," she said quietly, "was never for show." She held it a beat longer, then laid it flat beside the audio transcript. This was a death certificate in rubber. The room froze, not a sound. Even the stenographer paused. The first time in the hearing, her fingers hesitated. "A child died believing someone was coming to help," Jasmine continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But instead of aid, he got a wristband. Instead of medicine, a memo. Instead of hope, a transfer to a campaign war chest." Donald Trump seethed across the table. His lawyers whispered furiously into his ear. Eric looked down at his hands, not in anger now, in something closer to fear. Jasmine tapped the transcript. Every denial, every dollar, every lie is now on record. She turned to the panel. "Members of this committee, we have audio evidence, financial records, falsified patient representation, and witness testimony, all corroborated." She looked at the seal of the United States House of Representatives above her, then back at the camera broadcasting across the country. "This isn't about politics. This is about accountability." She sat down. No smile. No smirk. Just silence. The committee chair, Representative Gail Simmons, adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and spoke into her mic. "The Oversight Committee will now move into closed session for deliberation. A formal vote on criminal referral to the Department of Justice will be held in 30 minutes. The lights dimmed slightly as chatter burst behind the scenes. Reporters scrambled out. Legal aides whispered with urgency. Jasmine stayed seated. Outside the building, crowds were already gathering. Screens replayed the clip. "It's not fraud if they believe it's charity." The phrase took on a life of its own. It was painted on protest signs, printed across T-shirts, turned into remixes, but the words that stayed with the nation weren't Eric's. They were Jasmine's. This was a death certificate in rubber. Within the hour, every major network had broken format to go live with the update. The emails, the audio, the contract that read, "Crutches provided, talent must sign NDA." It wasn't just scandal anymore. It was indictment in motion. And at the heart of it all, one red wristband sat alone on a long wood table, surrounded by silence that felt more sacred than courtroom procedure. A silence earned. A silence built from one mother's grief, a congresswoman's refusal to blink, and a boy's final possession. Finally heard. 2 weeks had passed since the gavel dropped on the Oversight Committee's final hearing, but the sound still echoed, not just in the Capitol, but in living rooms, classrooms, courtrooms, and cribs across America. The scandal hadn't disappeared, it had transformed, and on a warm morning painted in soft spring light, a line formed outside the Capitol building. Not for protest, not for spectacle, but for presence. Inside, the chamber filled with lawmakers from both parties. No red ties, no blue lapel pins, just silence and suit jackets. At the front, Jasmine Crockett stood once again, not behind a witness desk, not in defense or confrontation, but with a draft in hand. Its title printed in crisp black ink, the Deviant Protection Act. She looked up, met the eyes of the nation through live broadcast once more. This bill prohibits the use of any minor's image, likeness, medical narrative, or personal tragedy in nonprofit fundraising without full transparency, documented consent, and certified proof of benefit delivered. She paused, voice steady. It mandates annual audits for all 501(c)(3) charities working with pediatric patients and criminalizes false visual representation, including the use of actors, staged medical footage, or token gifts that simulate assistance without proof of delivery. No applause, not yet. Just breath held across both aisles. Her voice dropped slightly, just enough for the words to settle. It will also retroactively open any campaign-affiliated foundation to federal review if children were used in visual campaigns without consent between 2012 and 2025. One lawmaker whispered, "That covers everyone." Jasmine heard it, but she didn't blink. This is not a partisan bill. It is a promise. She held up the wristband, now framed in soft cloth, worn with time, but never with shame. This was never a fundraising tool. It was a child's final possession. And today we stop pretending that memory can be monetized. A moment passed. Then Representative Gail Simmons stood. She clapped once, firm, unhurried. Another lawmaker followed, then another, then all. The House chamber rose, left and right, veterans and freshmen. The applause rolled like thunder made of bone, not explosive, but deep, steady, real. At the back of the room, Deborah Marsh stood silently in the viewing gallery. In her hands, folded tightly, was the original wristband, the one not submitted to Congress, the one she'd kept with her every day since Davian passed. She didn't wave, didn't speak. She simply wept. But this time, it was different. Not from grief, not from guilt. From something so unfamiliar she barely recognized it at first. Hope. She whispered it to herself. "You're changing things, baby." Beside her, a young girl in pigtails, Aaliyah J., flown in from Baton Rouge by a donor group, reached out and held Deborah's hand. She smiled, then whispered, "I want to write a law one day too." Deborah's tears came freely now, and for once they weren't met with silence. The crowd behind her didn't look away. They nodded, cried with her, stood with her. Because this wasn't Jasmine's moment alone. It belonged to every mother who buried a child without justice, every nurse who quit in shame, every child who ever wore a rubber band instead of getting real help. That night, every news station led with the same headline: Davian's law passes, first round with unanimous bipartisan support. Even the anchors on networks, once dismissive of the scandal, paused before reading Jasmine's name, now with a tone of respect. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett introduced the bill known as the Deviant Protection Act. And today, for the first time in decades, the chamber stood not for a party, but for a child. Outside the Capitol, red wristbands were passed out not in protest, but in remembrance. And this time they meant something. They weren't props. They were promises. To never again let a child be erased in the name of power. To make the story of Davian Marsh more than a tragedy. To make his name echo in the one place where most children are forgotten. The law. And when Jasmine left the chamber that night, she didn't walk with cameras. She didn't walk with staff. She walked alone down the marble steps, wristband still in hand, knowing the story wasn't over. But for the first time, justice had finally found its shape. Weeks passed. The headlines began to slow. The hearings faded from the front page. But something far deeper refused to disappear. In a small schoolyard in southeast D.C., whilst the wall that once bore peeling paint now shone with color, a team of middle schoolers, brushes in hand, worked in quiet concentration. Their teacher guided them, but the vision was theirs. The mural was of a little boy, Davian Marsh, not in a hospital bed, not with IV lines or shadows under his eyes, but standing tall in a white lab coat, a stethoscope around his neck. One hand outstretched, holding a red wristband, not as a symbol of what he lost, but of what he changed. Above him, in big block letters, "Truth doesn't fade." It was painted in every shade of resistance: crimson, navy, bright gold, the kind of color no empire could whitewash. And across the country, that red band became more than rubber. It became a message passed from child to child, parent to parent, worn at rallies, left at courthouses, framed in pediatric offices. It showed up on bracelets, backpacks, even in street art. Some wore it as a sign of grief, others as a declaration. We saw what they tried to bury. In her office, Jasmine Crockett kept the original wristband sealed in a glass box now. But on her wrist, she wore a replica, same size, same color, and posted just one photo to her Instagram. No caption, just a single image of the band beside a new piece of paper, a handwritten letter. The envelope had been folded at the edges from too much clutching, the ink smudged from fingers that held it too tight. Inside the note read, "Dear Miss Jasmine," I cried, but not because I was scared. "You made me feel brave. If you can speak, maybe I can too. Love, Aaliyah." She didn't post a caption. She didn't need to. The image reached 14 million people in 48 hours. One comment, buried among thousands, read simply, "If a child's wristband can shake an empire, what can your voice do?" And for once, no one argued in the comments. Because it wasn't a political question. It wasn't even a question of justice anymore. It was a challenge, a call, a whisper passed from a child who was once silenced, now echoing louder than any courtroom. The hearings had ended, the laws had passed, but the story of Davian Marsh was just beginning. In a world that often rewards silence and spectacle, one boy's quiet suffering exposed a truth too loud to ignore. Davian didn't leave behind fame, fortune, or speeches, only a red wristband and a story no one could bury. We are measured not by the power we hold, but by whose pain we choose to hear and what we do once we've heard it. Because sometimes the smallest voices don't fade. They become the laws, the echoes, and the reason we rise. If this story stirred something in you, don't scroll. Sit with it, share it, speak on it, like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes a child's life should never be a campaign strategy. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where no silence gets the last word. Hit the bell, because the next chapter won't be clean. It's raw. And it might just change how you define justice. This story is a fictional dramatization, inspired by real injustices and real courage. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental or symbolic for public reflection and accountability. Thanks for watching. Justice isn't handed down, it's demanded. This is Harrison Stories.